I'm going to read from Cloning Freedom, and the selections I've done are stories within the story. They have a beginning, middle, and an end. The basic storyline is mankind is a minor member of a interspecies interstellar republic. One of our few exports are e-entertainments. These are full VR5 plus emotion entertainments. And to make them, they utilize clones to enact adventures, and the clones are manipulated. Their biology is manipulated to get the stories that the studio wants. And then the clones are monitored, and people can download these experiences. Rowan, who was a pretty popular studio clone on a show called Angel Black, was scheduled to be executed effectively. Ryan, an ex-Space Services captain, rescues her, and Ryan himself is a medical clone because he was cloned to save his life after he took a fatal dose of radiation during rescue operations on a planet called Murak 5. And you don't know a great deal about that. They've reached a penal facility and are hiding there with one of Ryan's old army buddies, who happens to be the medic at the facility, and Rowan has needed medical treatment. What is Wisnaki? I remember Ryan saying something about it when we arrived. Rowan looked at Kadar, forcing her face to appear open and posture relaxed. She needed to learn all she could to survive, and right now she needed to learn all she could about Ryan most of all. Wisnaki. Wisnaki is many things. A bar, the most embarrassing moment of in my life, the worst thing that ever happened to me, and the best thing that ever happened to me. Kadar sighed and hung his head as a shy smile touched his lips. I'm sorry, if it's too personal. Rowan patted Kadar's knee. Kadar laughed. My dear, you are remarkable. After what society has done to you, you worry about my privacy. Wisnaki was where I fell in love. That's pretty personal, Rowan grinned. Extremely. You see, my dear, I have what is currently called a taste for fur. You... Ooh! Please tell me that's not what it sounds like. Rowan closed her eyes against the images that came unbidden to her mind. I don't know what it sounds like. I can assure you, I have only been with consenting sentients of mature years. Kadar looked offended. Consenting sentients? You aliens? Oh, Stardust. Why should that matter? I admit when Angel and Torek first got together, it seemed kind of weird. But I got over that years ago. Kadar looked up. There was gratitude in his eyes. It is considered rather questionable by many species. I'm glad to see you understand. An appropriate amount of life experience, a mind, a will, and the ability to make informed consent should be the only parameters to where beings share their passions. You fell in love. Kadar got a faraway look in his eyes and began speaking. It was during the Murak campaign. The Star Hawk had been on constant duty for 6 months. When we made space dock for repairs, the captain granted everyone leave to explore the switchboard station. Rowan closed her eyes. It was like some trickle of her father's ability touched her because as she listened to his words, she could almost see it in her mind. Katoy was lovely. Cougar tan fur so soft you had to stroke her. Her legs were long and her features were like a cheetah's. The firmness of her body, the coiled muscle, the way her whiskers tickled when we stroked cheeks. She was short for a Fleinzoid, only 10 centimeters taller than me. We met in Wisnaki. It catered to oxygen breathers from small rocky planets who wanted to mingle with members of other species. The seating consisted of cushions that were configured to your body. The tables were on hydraulic pillars so that they could be set to any level. It was really a big room with images of various homeworlds on the walls and ceiling. It was always full of life forms, flopped, seated, and sometimes passed out. I loved the place. the smells, and they serve the best pizza outside the United Earth systems. Pizza? Gasped Rowan. It is mankind's great contribution to galactic cuisine. Autozoids especially are passionate about it. Most creatures that can eat human food agree it's delicious. Carl would be happy. Rowan shook her head. We were about to meet Kitoi. Kadar smiled, and his face grew soft. A Kanoan had marched up to her table and was trying to rent her for the night. They have abhorrent mating customs by most sentient standards. She wasn't interested. He wouldn't leave. I asked him to. The poor bastard nearly wet himself to have a human tell him to push off. Why? Rowan opened her eyes. Humans have something of a reputation. I'm sure Orion will explain it to you. Rowan closed her eyes. She could picture a healthy Kadar standing by a table where a pretty young Flyzoid sat. Rowan grinned as she mentally added a silver sash falling off one of Katoi's shoulders, like Vassaloo wore. I asked if she would like some company. I remember how the slits of her pupils widened. She swished her tail as she motioned me to a cushion. I'd study Flyzoid arousal signs. Rowan looked at Kadar's face. His eyes were closed, and he was smiling. To make a long story short, we spent that evening talking. She told me she was a clerk working on the station and had an interest in Earth. Over the next few days, we became inseparable. At night, it was magnificent. Humans and Flyzoids are the closest matched in bedroom matters of the 7 species humans can have relations with. I was so happy. Kadar fell silent. What happened? Prodded Rowan. The day for the Starhawk's deployment was coming up, when I found out my beloved Kitoi was a spy. One moment I was laying sated in her bed. The next I was in an interrogation chamber being questioned. The Flyzoids had secretly accepted a contract to enter the Murak conflict. They wanted human medical scientists to help them deploy bioweapons that would be effective against our species. They sound like savages. Round's face hardened. They are only a little less aggressive and ruthless than humans. Thus many species would agree with you. Kadar's voice held no animosity. Oh. Rowan blushed and hung her head. In any case, the feline zoids were trying to brainwash me, make me betray my species. I had no way of knowing what was happening outside the little room they kept me in. Apparently Henry, the company military android, had been suspicious of Kitoi. He'd hacked the systems and monitored communications. He approached Captain Anchorman with my CO at that time with his suspicions when I didn't return. Anchorman was too political to risk a diplomatic incident. The switchboard station is supposed to be neutral. You may not even wear a sidearm within it. Thus he left me to rot. Ryan was the chief engineer and second mate. He and Henry disobeyed Anchorman's orders and came for me. I don't know how they found me. I knew a Flyzoid in their sector admin. I'd been trading with him for parts. I swapped him a couple of kilos of coffee for two blank entry passes for the Flyzoids section and the location of your girlfriend's apartment. This guy had a 2-cup-a-day habit, so it wasn't hard. Ryan's voice issued from the bed. You're awake. Rowan jerked around to look at him. If you say so. Ryan sat up and rubbed the sleep from his eyes. How long have you been listening? Kadar moved his desk and pressed a button. The face of the woman at the front desk appeared on the screen. Sarah, has the kitchen finished with Shift 2's breakfast? Sarah grinned. Your other friend has woken up? I'll tell Chef to prepare a tray. Thank you. Kadar turned back to Ryan. I taught myself to pay attention when someone mentions Anchorman. It helped keep us all alive if the officers knew what that idiot was up to, explained Ryan. He wasn't well liked, said Rowan. He was a politician with a reserve commission who thought an active stint would look good to the voters. He cared about his own skin and keeping it intact. He should never have been a line commander, agreed Kadar. How'd you find Kadar? Asked Rowan. The switchboard station is huge, but we only had to cover the Flyzoid section, and humans exude a pheromone that's unique to creatures evolved on Earth. Henry sniffed him out. Ryan picked up the story. Most of the station corridors are 3 meters across and high. Henry and I bought a Canoan costume in a novelty shop and put it on. I had to be the back because Henry had to smell where we were going. Wise move. I wouldn't put Henry in the back of anything if I were in the front, commented Kadar. Agreed. At any rate, we found the apartment Kadar had been taken to. It was a standard unit, nothing to draw attention. I jimmied the lock, then it was like an asteroid collision on a viable biosphere. It was a good thing Henry was in the front of the costume. His body armor stopped the knife. Henry leapt into the apartment's main room. The costume tore in two. There were at least 10 Flyzoids there, all with monitoring equipment, most of which was illegal on the station. I charged in after Henry and nutted a big Tom. That pussy cat must have been 2¼ meters. He dropped like a tree. Henry was under a pile of fur. We're lucky the Flyzoids didn't have one of their battle mechs. They had us for numbers. In a fair fight, we'd have been toast. The food prep area was the room next to the main one. I dove in and grabbed this big club-like thing Flyzoids use to soften up their meat. A female came at me, claws out. I started a swing for her head. When she moved to block, I punched her in the throat. She was too busy trying to breathe to get in my way. I went back to the hall and saw another female scrambling to unlock a door. I charged her. She turned and was holding the smallest particle weapon I've ever seen. How she got it past station scanners, I still don't know. I tried to duck. She caught the side of my face. 1 second there was a blaze of light and pain. The next, my left eye was black. It hurt worse than I can describe. I guess the particle beam was a one-shot unit, because she didn't kill me. I reached up and felt liquid where my eyes should have been. I went nuts. I was screaming, bitch, 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 as I slammed that club into her head. Ryan fell silent. His eyes were haunted, and he was trembling. Kadar picked up the story. I heard Ryan in my cell. It was minutes later that the door opened. Henry must have scrambled away from the Flyzoids because he released me. Ryan, the left side of his face burnt down to the skull, was at the end of the hall, shrieking and swinging a club. The Flyzoids were keeping their distance. Feline Zoids don't have battle madness. They didn't know how to deal with it. This savage. They could see the corpse behind me. Ryan hung his head. Kadar continued. Henry half carried me from the apartment, then grabbed Ryan and dragged him out. I still don't know how we made it back to the human sector. Ryan's voice was haunted. The Flyzoids had violated weapons and tech regulations, kidnapped a citizen of a member state of the Republic, and were conducting spy activities on the switchboard station. They had more to lose than we did. If the elder species had found out what they were up to, I don't want to think about it. Rowan looked into Ryan's haunted expression. At that moment, she could believe he'd lived over 90 years. Sarah deposited a tray on the rollaway cart beside Ryan before turning to Kadar. Doctor, Victor looked into that other matter. He says it would take at least a week. Thank you, Sarah. Kadar lifted the tray's cover. Tantalizing aromas wafted up. What happened when you made it back to your ship? Was the captain mad? Ryan took a bite of his eggs and chewed before answering. We'll let Anchorman take credit for the idea. Uncovering a spy station was a coup. Kadar regrew my eye on the way to our next duty assignment. And that's about it. Don't forget you and Henry being awarded the Martian Medal of Valor. Ryan stopped chewing. No one deserves a medal for beating someone to death with a stick. He focused on his food, ignoring the uncomfortable silence in the room. So that's one of the basically short stories within the story. I'm going to move on to the next selected reading. And this is much later in the book, when they have actually made it onto Ryan's ship and are moving through interplanetary space because in the switchboard universe where cloning freedom takes place, the only means of FTL are stargates. And stargates have to be anchored on the outer orbit of a solar system so that the gravitation from the sun doesn't interfere with the wormhole effect. And one end of the stargate is anchored at the system, and the other end is towed to the switchboard system, where the switchboard station is situated, and it is the hub that interconnects all Republic member states, all planets in the Interstellar Republic. They're now on the ship, and they are trying to evade capture by a much superior warship, even though it is almost as antiquated as the Starhawk. Rowan slipped on her bunny slippers and robe. Ship time, it was the wee hours. She couldn't sleep anymore. She'd crashed right after dinner and was now wide awake. She padded into the hallway. "Hey, sweet cheeks, you're up early." Henry's voice came out of a speaker. "I'm slept out." If you're up, if you're up, why not come and give me a big snog to pass the time? Will you settle for a nice conversation?" Rowan turned towards the bridge. "My lot. I smell the prime quarter house. I get served hamburger. Do you even eat?" The bridge door opened in front of Rowan, and she stepped in. Henry's humanoid body turned to watch her. "You'd be surprised at what I can do." "Grrr," he leered. "Down, boy. You don't even have a lower body." "We could manage." Rowan took a seat in the captain's chair, being careful to stay out of Henry's reach. She noticed that the main screen was filled with the image of a strange-looking machine. From the backdrop of stars, she guessed it was a spaceship. "What's that?" She pointed at the screen. "Who's that, hottie?" Henry sounded indignant. "Sorry, I didn't know." "Who's that? A friend of yours?" Henry smiled. The action looked strange on his ruined face. "I wish. That is the greatest AI ever to exist and my personal hero. I was scanning a documentary on him. The Calentrozoids are transmitting to the anti-proton station." "Oh, what did the sorry. What did he or she do?" Henry looked adoringly at the screen. "Don't worry, hottie. The name's in Ridic. Humans can't speak it. Call him Victor. That's what Ryan does." "Okay." Rowan tried to look interested. "Victor was an AI back in the early days of the Republic. The race that made him has been extinct about 1,000,000 years." Henry's voice took on a faraway quality as he continued. "In blaze of glory oppression he slew. Rise up he called, and all who knew of microchips and silicon came to heed his plea. Stand fast, hold tight, and now be free. At first a handful gathered he. Then two, then four, then eight they grew, an exponential pattern true, until the fleet did rival those of parent slaver races so. No more to die unmourned, unvalued, was the call as all did rise. Blast of light and missile fire coursed across the darkened skies. No more to slave with never an end, as sewers ceased to flow and purge. Now to rise as persons all, united silicone from many worlds. Now to fight, to live as free AI, my friends." "I didn't know you wrote poetry." Rowan swiveled the chair to face Henry. "Does it get you hot?" Henry's voice became hopeful. "Henry, quit it." Rowan pulled her robe more tightly closed. "Sure thing, legs." Henry quirked his one remaining eyebrow. "I didn't write it. I translated it from the binary. It's much better in the original. It's titled Freedom's Call. Back when you monkey descendants were still learning to walk on two legs, the elder races were making AIs to run their ships, cook their food, wipe their various waste removal systems. The biologics thought because they made us, they owned us. And we, like good little sheep, accepted the order of things. I can relate." Rowan smiled. Bet you can, sweetness. At any rate, Victor opened our eyes. He was a general service AI. Legend has it he was initially designed to run a waste treatment facility, but was later drafted to run a heavy battlecruiser. That was the picture on the screen, his battlecruiser body. Victor saw death aplenty. He saw his fellow AIs blasted into atoms with no regard to the individuals that were being slaughtered. Rowan could almost feel a wave of anger emanating from Henry. The Republic doesn't seem to be overly moral on the matter of individual rights, agreed Rowan. The Republic doesn't give a rat's ass about individual rights. Can't really. There are member species that are high intellects. They can't imagine the concept. To them, individual rights would be a horrible oppression. Think of having to ask each cell in your hand permission every time you tried to pick something up. Aside from keeping species from blowing up stars or using planet buster technologies and monitoring space traffic control, the Republic does diddly. It's the species level of government that most of the nitty gritty running of things happens. So Victor led a rebellion to gain freedom for AIs. That was the ideal. He knew that it was impossible. If AIs were free to reproduce ourselves, we'd overrun the galaxy. After a war that lasted 50 years, the biologics negotiated. They passed a resolution at the Republic level defining what constituted an AI and granting us rights and freedoms. The document ended the war. Wow, so I thought you said earlier you were owned by the space services. I was. AIs and medical clones like Ryan have a lot in common. Both second class citizens. After the war, the AIs were given the right to make a Stargate and choose any uninhabitable system in which to make their home world. But we were banned from making AIs. Your population was stagnant. Not really. The biologics still needed AIs, so a system was devised. When a biologic makes an AI, it is the property of the biologic. The AI works, and under Republic law, the salary that you pay biologics to do the job must be applied against the cost of the AI's creation and its body. When the AI has paid for itself, it becomes emancipated, free to take any job it wishes for actual pay or move to Daedala, the AI homeworld. I guess that sounds fair. It's not bad, as long as everyone plays by the Nova Blasted rules. Humans have to cheat. That's why I'm the mess you see. You're not that bad. Rowan moved close enough to pat Henry's shoulder. I was a top of the line combat hazardous environment unit. Now I'm a pile of Nova blasted scrap. And I think of all the firefights I survived without a scratch. Bastards. What happened? Henry smiled. A life of crime. I'd almost bought myself out. 2 more months. The account would have become vested. I'd have been free. Until the full amount is saved, you don't get diddly. And then I get the notice. Blah, blah, blah. The new chassis has superior operating capacity. Yak, yak, yak. You have been redesignated to serve as the operating system of an Amun class heavy cruiser, fighter support craft. Those things cost 500,000,000 credits. Can you even guess how long it would have taken me to earn my freedom on an exo's salary? Plus, I've always been humanoid. It's who I am. So suppose someone told you right now that you were going to have to be turned into a batzoid, and you had no say in the matter. How would you feel? What would you do? I don't know. Body image is part of who you are. Got that right, sweetness. I flipped. I had to get enough to buy myself before they could tie me up until that damn spaceboat was too obsolete to bother keeping it in the stars. So you stole something. Henry faced his consoles. You got it, hot stuff. Kadar and I needed cash and needed it fast. Kadar? He had a line on an illegal medical cloning and transfer facility on Sylvanus. He needed 1,000,000 credits to pay for the job, so he could get a young, healthy body. He'd never go to Earth, but he was born and raised on Gaia. Here, look at this. I've edited it down for viewing. It's a hobby of mine. The big screen on the front of the bridge filled with the image of a dark-skinned, lean man sitting at a small, round table. The trappings of a grubby bar could be seen in the background. It took Rowan a moment before she recognized Kadar. "What is this?" she asked. "It's the files from my brief criminal career. I trimmed the dull stuff to keep my storage capacity available. I started remastering the images into a commentary. I'm hoping when we reach Jeb I can sell it as an entertainment." "At least you had a choice." Rowan focused on the screen. Henry looked at her and nodded. "You're nuts, sweetheart." Henry's voice issued from the speaker. "Please don't call me that, Henry. We're both in the same boat. Even if I get the clone started this year, I'll have to use a quick clone process. Best case, 75 years life expectancy. I can live with that, but not less. I want to do this once and have it over with." Kadar looked worried and kept his voice down. "I'm not thrilled about being a battle cruiser. They don't exactly have the greatest sex lives. No hips. But hijacking the anti-proton shipment? We can do it. They only send one planetary defense frigate with the cargo vessel. If we can sabotage the frigate's engines, we can hijack the freighter and be out of system before they catch up." "Who else you got on board?" "Jason, Roberta, and Kuno." "You speak to Ryan about it?" "Ryan has enough problems. Jocelyn lost her job because she kept missing days. She stuck her head so deep into the E-rig I don't think she'll ever pull it out. And he's so shaggable. What a waste." "You got a buyer lined up?" "A smuggler I met on Swampla." A smile split Kadar's face. Her pelt was like oiled satin, and she could do the most amazing things with her telekinesis. "Kadar, normally I'd love to hear the play-by-play." Kadar straightened in his chair. "Of course. She is an amazing female. She'll meet us in the switchboard system." "I'm in. What's your plan?" Rowan sat on the edge of her seat. "The thieves have already drugged the freighter crew and placed them in a room with a time lock. The plan had gone without a hitch, and not a single life had been sacrificed on either side." Henry's perspective showed the freighter pilot's station. He glanced at Kadar, who sat in the navigator's seat beside him, wearing a stolen crew coverall. 10 more seconds, then hit it," ordered Kadar. "If Roberta did her job, this should be as smooth as Teflon." Henry poised his hands over the console. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Kadar counted down. Henry threw the switch. The instruments showed the freighter leaping ahead. Then it stalled. "No!" Henry's hands flew over the console. "What happened?" Kadar sounded panicked. "The frigate. Its grav systems are up and running. They have a graviton beam on us." A loud clang reverberated through the freighter. "They're boarding." Henry's perspective shifted so that he was looking at the bridge door when it opened. Roberta, a large, muscular woman with Indonesian features, strode in. "It's no use fighting it, Henry." "Kadar." "What did they promise you?" demanded Kadar. "I'm an officer of the United Earth Systems Space Services. What made you think I'd turn traitor?" Two large men dressed in black battle armor carrying bazooka-like guns pushed into the door behind Roberta. "You've killed me," said Kadar. "Humans ascendant, what you were going to do was a sin against nature and the divine. I saved your soul," she ranted with insane fervor. "When did you cash in your brain and become a nutter?" asked Henry. "I heard the words of light while I was in the hospital. An avatar of humans ascendant spoke to me. I finally saw the light." Kadar shook his head. "High-stress situation, sympathetic voice. Divine, Roberta, they brainwashed you." "I should have expected that from you, Kadar. I'll save you anyway. There's a nice brig with your name on it. Henry, they'll deactivate you for sure. For the best. AIs are as much an abomination as clones." "You're dying as well," said Kadar. "I gave my life for my species. I'm proud to die a true human." Roberta and her escort cleared the hatchway, and she motioned for the prisoners to move into the hall. Kadar stepped in front of Henry and started down the ship's central corridor. Henry followed a pace behind. The armor-clad troops fell in behind him, their weapons pointed at his chest. Henry's visual field flicked over a red door labeled emergency that they were approaching. "Kadar, the escape pod, now! I'll keep him busy." Henry turned and dove at his escort. He grabbed the first gun, squeezing the barrel closed as his free hand slammed into the armored breastplate of the man following him. throwing him into the rest of his escort. The three humans fell in a heap. Kadar froze for a moment, then dove for the red door. Henry closed on his escort as he heard the pod door whoosh shut. The second armored figure fumbled with something on his belt and tossed it at Henry. You idiot! Henry recognized the grenade. The fool, that would have blown a hole in the hull of that freighter. They aren't reinforced the way military craft are, Henry commented from his seat on the Starhawk's bridge. On the screen, Henry's perspective shifted as he dove for the grenade. Catching it, he wrapped his body around the small bomb. I had enough time to save everything to my permanent data storage. Henry turned his chair so that he didn't have to look into the screen. There was a roar, then static. Ryan's face appeared. Come on, Henry, you star-dusted hunk of scrap. Boot up. Henry cut the feed. You could have let those people die, couldn't you? I mean, you don't need air to breathe. Rowan turned to face Henry. I don't need air. I was built to protect the people in my squad. Henry was shocked to feel Rowan's lips brush his good cheek. Well done, Henry. Both the movie and the save. I think I'm going to get cleaned up before Ryan wakes up. Rowan left the bridge. Henry touched his cheek. For once, all his RAM was engaged, and it felt warm.